Hi, this is Jacob Allen with EDL 854, the case study. First off, summary of the information. Mr. Santos is principal at Briardale Elementary School, which also functions as the community's community center, the gathering space. The superintendent places funds into the schools to use on curriculum. Supplemental funds are raised by a foundation headed by a parent in the community, so through a parent foundation. The funds go back to the school raised by this parent foundation for Mr. Santos, and then an appointed teacher decide what to do with the funds. And in most recent history, they've used that on music, arts, and foreign language. Mr. Barely is the new parent that is in charge of the fundraising, and he also has extra motivation to raise more money this year. And I'll mention more about that in an upcoming slide. Mr. Barely decided to do a raffle for cash fundraiser. Word spread around town about this raffle for cash fundraiser, and the sheriff was there the night of the event and arrested Mr. Barely. Mr. Barely was convicted of a misdemeanor, and the story made front page news, embarrassing the school and Mr. Barely. Legal and ethical issues. First off, Mr. Santos has had his reputation damaged along with the school. He is the principal, so he should be the counsel for the parent organization. He's not in charge of it, just as the counsel, and should be helping them make decisions. Mr. Barely has a misdemeanor and damaged personal reputation, having to be in jail, and I'm sure for the future of his life that'll follow him where he goes. Nextly, the action Mr. Barely took broke the law in their state, and without knowing which state we're in, it must have been considered illegal gambling to do the cash for raffle. And nextly, Mr. Barely is not a school employee, so he didn't breach any sort of contract, and there does not seem to be any sort of harassment or discrimination in this. Next up, a one-sentence summary of the whole situation. A foundation ran by parents ran an illegal cash raffle for cash fundraiser that ended in legal drama highlighted by the local newspaper. So a couple more of the facts that we haven't mentioned yet, categorized. First off, for people, we have Mr. Barely, who is the head parent again, who's directly in competition with Mr. Morley, a frat brother of his, and so he has extra motivation for raising money because of that. Nextly, the parent foundation seems to hold quite a bit of power in this school, and the arts language are highly respected. Mr. Santos is another one of our people involved in this situation. And then this is a school where teachers will retire from instead of leaving. Next up, the place where we're at is a pretty diverse school. There's 600 students. It's urban. There are 6 schools with around the same size, 500 to 800 ranging. The school serves as the meeting center. There are 2 middle schools in this district and 1 high school. Lastly, for program, this is an elementary school, K through 5, and we're not sure whether it is public or private. So the main stakeholders being affected here. Mr. Santos could lose all credibility to manage groups, and as previously mentioned, he also should be the counsel for this parent group. Next up, Mr. Barely could lose all of his reputation for the crime and not be able to get jobs in the future. The parent foundation could lose their ability to operate because of malpractice, may potentially not run in the future. The community will also potentially be affected. They might end up losing access to the building since they had this issue happen. There is not much information about the sheriff and the laws that were broken in the state. I'd like to know more background on that. We're also not sure the outcome and decision Mr. Santos made towards the parent foundation and Mr. Barely and the newspaper. I do believe if we knew the state law on raffles, we would have enough information on the situation to make a decision. Raffles for cash, it just depends on the state from what I was finding online. Section 6. Possible decisions. The first one and most hands-off approach would be to take 0 action on the situation. Don't address parent foundation. Don't make any sort of rules updates. Let Mr. Barely come back and be the leader of the group again. Don't make any statement to the general public or the media. Most extreme flip side of that would be to disband the parent foundation completely, no longer let them operate. Also, come out against Mr. Bailey in the media and try to separate yourself from his actions, put him down, and then permanently remove Mr. Bailey from any sort of school function. Don't let him be on school grounds. If he's seen he is going to be removed from the premises. This is where I felt like we hit the standard of candidates understanding how to evaluate, develop, and advocate for data-informed and equitable resource planning. And on the next slide, you'll see why that feeds also into the student development. Next up, we have our in-between option, which would be to first make sure that Mr. Bailey is never part of the parent foundation again. Make all the members of the school foundation review school finance rules every year prior to school start so that they're up to date on those so they don't make this same mistake. And then lastly, go to the media, make a statement about how disappointed you were, and make sure to be fair in statements to all parties. Just give the facts. Don't put anyone down when talking about the situation. So weighing out these options, not taking any action could lead to just kind of a systematic failure of the power structure of your school. Letting Mr. Bailey take any part in your school would send a pretty poor message to the community. And then not having any discussion with the foundation would let them believe there are no negative repercussions for the situation, that you did nothing. Not a good look. Middle option, or sorry, the most intense option, disbanding the parent foundation would negatively affect your students because of all the opportunities it would erase. That's where all your money for your extras was coming from. Trying to make Mr. Bailey look bad could end up making the school actually look bad, and like they're out to badmouth community members. You might lose participation in the future from community members because of that. And then for the intermediate option, I do think not letting Mr. Bailey have any interaction with the school would send the right message to the community saying, you know what, you can't come in here and do illegal stuff. And then making all members of the foundation review rules may make some parents drop from the funding, but it is good practice to make sure there's compliance with the rules and you have long-term year-to-year plans on how fundraising should be done. And this is where I felt like it fit right in there was you're evaluating your resource needs, you are looking at the data to see, and you're thinking multi-year resource plans when you're talking about year to year, how are we going to raise money? So my choice is, again, is a mixture of what all I've said. So first, I think the best option would be to make sure Mr. Bailey is not involved in the school in general. He has no sort of leadership role. He's allowed on the school grounds, just no sort of role in the school ever again. I do think you should address the parent foundation and let them know of a couple of rules. Any fundraising idea should come through you. They should be run by you just to see if it meets legal rules. And then they should review the finance rules at the beginning of each school year to make sure they are compliant. Nextly, I would address after addressing the parent foundation, I would address the community about why we're going to keep the foundation, because ultimately it's for the students. And then lastly, I would also address the new rule changes for the coming years that they have to follow. And this is where I felt like candidates could use their understanding and capacity to undertake and implement this work within a school setting, the summary of all of what we have done.